Okay, Rod, what was your favourite big book of activities as a kid? You know, when you had those books that you go on a long drive or something like that, and there's the find a word or colouring in or number challenges or spot the difference. Which one?
Yeah. I like the one where there's pictures of people sitting on the couch, and I would imagine I was sitting on the couch.
That's not a game.
And the other one, no, there was one called it was even old when I was little. It was called Cole's Funny Picture Book.
Okay.
Yes.
And it was dense and weird and oldie schooledy, and it had just an array of stories and ideas and activities that I'm not even sure if I dreamt them, that was just
I remember that. I remember that book. The pictures were kind of Victorian in their ornate. Yeah.
Is this now when you say Cole's Funny Picture Book? Is this like Cole's, the supermarket grocery?
That's how it was spelt, but I don't know if it was the same.
I think there's a laneway in Melbourne. In that sort of laneway section, that was the Coles Arcade, and I don't know if it was actually the same Coles as the modern Coles supermarket. Well, but I, at least in my mind, connected the Coles Funny Picture Book to the Coles Arcade.
Well, okay, I was really hoping for a segue here because I wanted to talk just for a second about grocery stores, and I've got a kids' activity for you that I want you to help me out with. It's spot the difference. So if you can see on the left and the right of this image, can you spot the difference between the two of those, let's say, grocery store shelves?
Oh, I got one. One of them has less stuff in it.
One's way less stuff.
Yeah,
it's less bountiful. It's a little bit. It's not a very hard spot the difference.
This is not my first time looking at stuff though, so to be fair, I had an advantage.
Now, I don't mean to alarm you, but the picture on the right is your normal grocery shop. What do they got? They got watermelons, apples, oranges, weird nuts, avocados, carrots, all sorts of delicious things like that. But the one on the left...
No, wait. If you're going to say it's my normal one, I want to know which kinds of avocados, what variety of nuts. Are they salted or unsalted? You said normal.
I don't have that information, I'm afraid. But the one on the left, that's a potential future that people are worried about. Because this is the future that people say if bees disappear from our Earth.
Isn't it basically, that's just a bunch of nuts by the looks of it. It's just a bag of peanuts.
You're just worried about, you're stuck on the peanuts.
That's all I can see.
I'm moving you on here. I'm moving you on here to say that people are really worried that if bees disappear from our Earth, so too do so many different types of fruit and vegetables. What do we got? We got no apples, no peaches, no blueberries, no pears, no beans, no oil seeds, no almonds, no cherries, no raspberries, no blackberries, no cranberries.
So which ones were left in that picture?
Okay, we've got corn, some other nuts, potatoes, pineapples, and corn, pineapples, potato, and it looks like frogs in a basket.
Are they fruit? Are they fruit? I'm not sure if they're fruit.
Well, maybe they're green somethings.
Look, they could be chocolate frogs, and I'm happy to go to the chocolate discussion. But let's wait and see.
Oh my God!
All I'm hearing is the ingredients for a bizarre and yet kind of intriguing cocktail.
Corn, potato, frog, pineapple cocktail. Not a great one.
I'll take it.
Here's a stat for you, and this is what a lot of people are really worried about. So bees perform some level of pollination services for something like 75% of all plant species that we humans use for food worldwide. If we lost all bees, it'd have a huge impact. Some say something like 7 out of the 60 major agricultural crops in the North American economy would be lost, and many others around the world. And, people...
7 out of 60.
7 out of 60. Yeah, but the other ones are like, beef and things like that. You don't need bees for beef. So.
Oh, well, actually, again, I'll go there. I'll go there too. There's some perhaps unexpected links between bees and beef. That's a good one.
Well, listener, I'll just let you know we've brought an expert in to help out on this one. So I'll introduce Saul in a minute, but I want to turn to another expert just for a second, because when I was
me?
Not you, no, it's Albert Einstein. It's Albert Einstein. There's a quote that has been going around for quite some time that Albert Einstein supposedly said, if the bee disappears from the surface of the earth, and I'm not doing an Albert Einstein accent, man would have no more than 4 years to live. Hyperbole, panic, or a prediction of the future? Well, in the fall of 2006, Pennsylvania beekeeper David Hackenberg went to check on a group of beehives he'd left in a gravel parking lot near Tampa, Florida. It's a long way from home. We'll get to why they're so far from home, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, to his surprise, the hives were nearly empty. No adult bees, no dead bees, just a lonely queen and a few young stragglers in each one. The others had simply
Some
vanished.
joke about a nightclub in Sydney during the 1980s or something.
It's lockout laws. It's lockout laws. The bees have gone through lockout laws. There's just one queen left. Hive after hive after hive. In all, Hackenberg, he had 3,000 hives. It seemed like 2/3 of them had just disappeared in the night. Not the boxes, but the bees inside the hives. Within a few weeks, hundreds, thousands maybe, of beekeepers around America began reporting similar problems. Welcome to the Wholesome Show, the Lonely Bee Queen podcast of science.
For people who sit at the back of the class and in which we ask stupid questions. We're modifying the intro.
I'm Will Grant.
I'm Dr. Roderick Griffin. I'll fertilise your fruit for you, Lamberts.
You shouldn't offer to fertilise people's fruit. It doesn't sound
It's an
nice.
offer. It's not a demand. I'm a reasonable man. I'm just saying if you want the service. I'm just trying to help people. I love people.
And we're joined today, as I said before, by Professor Saul Cunningham from the Fenner School of Environment and Society here at ANU. Welcome, Saul.
G'day, and thanks for having me on. This is very exciting.
Oh, I wouldn't thank us yet.
Yeah, look.
Too late.
You might want to wait till the end.
The Wholesome Show is brought to you by the Australian National Centre for the Public Awareness of Science.
And fertilising fruits. No?
It could be. It could be.
It will be now.
It's not a strong strand of our expertise, but
No. But we could build. I mean, it sounds like we're going to need to, from what you're going to tell us.
Pivot. Look,
We're
maybe
gonna build.
Someone is going to have to do this. Okay.
I've already volunteered.
Fertilizing the fruit. Okay, David Hackenberg, I said. So he, and this is the winter of 2006, he lost more than 2/3 of his 3,000 beehives. As I said before, they all just, this is the thing, they all basically just emptied out. So there's no adult bees and no dead bees as well. Just the lonely queen and the stragglers. All the others, they couldn't even find the dead bee bodies. I don't know how far away they were, but they didn't know. And again,
this is based on the plot of a Kiwi sci-fi movie called The Quiet Earth.
Is it really?
This is what I'm hearing, because that's exactly what happened. Not to bees.
Look.
All animals, including humans. A dude woke up and everything was normal except no peeps. No bodies, nothing. This is the same thing.
What's the Day of the Triffids? Day of the Triffids, where
but they went blind.
They went blind.
Of the meteorite shower.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
No, The Quiet Earth. It's worth it. Low budget Kiwi sci-fi. This is the story you're telling without realizing it, about bees instead of people.
Yeah, maybe I am. So David's story was far from unique, and so by the end of the year, heaps of American beekeepers were complaining of unusually high rates of what they're calling colony loss, as their bees broke from overwintering. Now, normally over winter, when the bees don't go out and hunt for pollen in winter because, Saul, let me get this right, but there's no pollen in winter. Flowers don't exist.
Depends where you are in the world, but basically, yeah, that's the problem. Not enough food for bees.
Yeah, so over winter, bees put on their little bee blankets and cuddle up close and don't do very much. And so
this is why bees make honey, is mostly about getting through winter, right? It's their food, it's their stored energy. If you didn't have this problem, the bees would be much less interested in making honey.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yay, winter.
Exactly. I'd be very sad about that with no honey. It wouldn't be uncommon for colonies to collapse over winter. So for whatever reason, perhaps some sort of disease or a mite, or we'll come to that in a little bit, something like 10% of hives might collapse over winter. But he was seeing so much higher numbers. So David, as I said, saw 2/3. Some beekeepers lost nearly all or all of their colonies. And it was happening across America in 22 different states, including Hawaii, and then happening in other parts of the world too. So Andrew Scarlett is a Scottish bee farmer. In one winter...
They're the most aggressive kind, but damn, they make some honey.
The Scottish bees?
Oh yeah, no, the hive keepers themselves, the apurists of Scotland are dangerous men.
So he lost 80% of his 1,200 hives during one winter in 2009. And the Swiss government reported in 2012 about half of the bee population of Switzerland had not survived the winter. Country after country, beekeepers were reporting 30, 40, 50, 60% more in losses. Beehives just empty. Now, it was particularly worrying because beekeepers and researchers couldn't point to the cause of the losses. And
are there just, I don't know if you know this, but Saul, Mike, other than I assume the frozen wastelands of the north and south, are there any land masses on Earth that don't have bees?
Well, so you're highlighting the question of what do we mean when we say bees?
Whoa.
Right?
Oh.
So when Will says bees in this story, I would be carefully saying European honeybees. This one particular bee that we put a whole bunch of, we care about a lot. It's the one that we manage. It's the one that we have in those little boxes. So the European honeybee has been taken all around the world, and except Antarctica and probably a couple of islands, whatever. Basically, that bee is now global. But of course, that's one species, and there's 20,000 other species of bees out there. So there you go. That's my answer.
Yeah. Indeed. So
is he right, Will? You knew he was going to say that, right?
I knew he was going to say that, and indeed, we will come to that in a second. So it was quickly given a name. It was given actually two names. It was called in America they called it colony collapse disorder. In the UK they called it for a little while the Mary Celeste syndrome, which is
that's way cooler. Way cooler.
I know. I'm so disappointed that they didn't keep with that. So
see, that's a novel you'll read. Colony collapse disorder. You're like, man, sounds like a textbook of shit. But Mary Celeste, what was it? Syndrome.
Yeah, syndrome. So obviously named after the ghost ship, or not the ghost ship, but the ship with no one on it. Oh, there you go. See, that was all my childhood activity books were reading about ghost ships. I was just
that's all you ever did.
Yeah, all I ever did. You
grew up weird, man. You grew up weird, but now I know why.
So the media swiftly declared, as you can imagine, disaster. Time magazine went with the headline "Beepocalypse." Quartz went with "Beemageddon." I think at that point they ran out of ways of combining a bad word with bee.
Actually, can I just butt in here and say, as an experiment, go out and Google, look for any popular science coverage of bees, and for some reason you'll find bees attract punning headlines, I believe, more than any other area of science.
It's a big call.
It's always a buzz and to be or not to be, and comments about Winnie the Pooh, and I don't know what it is, but there's something about bees. I mean, I guess headline writers like puns in general, but I believe they like it even more with bees.
It fits.
Well, bees love punning.
It fits. It's cute. I mean, bee fits into words really easily in the way that frog doesn't. Frogpocalypse.
That would be the perfect control group. Is do people make puns when they talk about the frog declines? There are frog declines, perhaps, which we can describe in some similar language.
No, I've seen it. Frog laps, they call it.
Frog.
The frog apocalypse. Oh my God, I can't even say it.
Where else did they go? So what do we have? Beepocalypse, Beemageddon, National Public Radio in the US declared.
What about We Be Screwed?
We Be Screwed. I'm sure someone did. I didn't find that one.
Oh, look harder. Do research for a change.
Maybe.
Go beyond Wikipedia.
Yeah, NPR was very serious. They just went a crisis point for crops. Time magazine just went with a world without bees. Fox went for the very serious. This is Fox News. Went for the comparatively calm, very serious. Declining honeybee population could spell trouble for some crops.
Would it be the Democrats? We think yes.
They didn't do any blaming. They just
know there was a colon there. You just didn't read far enough. There was a colon. Blue states worse than red states.
And maybe they did put thanks Obama at the bottom.
Liberal bee.
Liberal bees dying. Who cares? No, they actually went straight. They went very straight.
It works. Liberal. It works. It all works.
Actually, if I was looking for the Fox angle on this, there's something suspicious about the fact that it's a largely female-based society, ruled over by thousands of sisters. They've relegated men to this almost trivial role. I would think that you could pick up on the weird feminist society angle if you were going for that kind of.
There you go.
I like
So
this.
weird feminist, basically communist society is about to collapse. What do we care? Says Fox News. I get it.
Yeah, they're all socialist Nazis anyway.
The Guardian, of course, went quite strong. Fears for crops as shock figures from America show the scale of bee catastrophe. The world may be on the brink of a biological disaster after news that a third of US bee colonies didn't survive the winter.
What year are we talking here, roughly? Sorry.
2007. Disturbing
Yeah, okay.
evidence that honeybees are in terminal decline has emerged from the United States. Well, actually, no, this is where for the fourth year in a row, more than a third of colonies have failed to survive the winter. The decline of the country's estimated 2.4 million beehives began in 2006, when a phenomenon dubbed colony collapse disorder led to the disappearance of hundreds of thousands of colonies. Since then, more than 3 million colonies in the US and billions of honeybees worldwide have died, and scientists are nowhere nearer to knowing what is causing the catastrophic fall in numbers. The number of managed honeybees, the collapsing global honeybee population is a major threat to crops.
Any stories about whether it was going on in the wild or that wasn't clear?
Oh, we will come to that one.
Inquiring mind.
I know you just want to know the truth of this matter, and I'm not going
I'm
to tell you.
Thinkster,
I'm
man.
gonna
I'm
tell
a
you-
thinkster.
I'm going to tell you the truth slowly, not quickly. You can't jump ahead.
You're dribbling on me. You're dribbling my truths.
Activists. So this is how the media reacted. How do you think that activists reacted?
They were cool about it. They were like, oh, let's just
They-
wait and see what
They
happens.
got active.
they did get active. Well, they did a bunch of different things, obviously. Hyperbole, something that they're very happy with anytime, but often many squeezed it into their existing campaigns. So
There were also bee suits involved. I know you'll find pictures of people wearing bee suits.
yeah, but they had them already. Like they
Yeah, I was going to say I've got one of those too, and I wasn't really into this. It's fine.
finally I've got something ready for this.
Yeah, you've come for the resistance meeting. It's like, okay, yep, that's why I'm wearing this. No problem at all. I'm not on my way to a kink party at all. This is all
Flushies.
bees.
Furries, nice. We should do something on furries. Anyway, the Centre
Next
for
week.
Research on Globalization, which is much more of an activist centre than a research centre, their headline was "Death and Extinction of the Bees: The Role of Monsanto?" ?
Just asking questions.
Yeah, they are. Scientists have recently reported that mass extinctions of marine animals may soon be occurring at alarmingly rapid rates than previously projected due to pollution, rising water and temperature, and loss of habitat. Many land species also face a similar fate for the same reasons. But perhaps the biggest foreboding danger of all facing humans is the loss of the global honeybee.
And the Queen Mother dying, that was pretty bad too.
Did she die around then?
No, I don't know.
Well, I don't think they cared about that. But if Monsanto was behind that,
I was going to say, if Monsanto secretly slipped a bit of
Of course they were. They took out Lady Di. Why would they
Mother's
take
cup
out
of
it?
tea.
Yeah, no, it's all part of it.
to be honest, though, assassinating someone at 101 seems like you've been
It's
planning
the
too
perfect
long.
crime. No one would expect foul play because she was going to die anyway. Boom.
So, like your New Zealand sci-fi movie, there's a bunch of filmmakers that dived in. So there's documentary makers that did short films called Queen of the Sun. What are the bees telling us? And that talked about the profound crisis of the honeybee.
Beautiful.
The short
That sounds a lot like perineum bleaching, like we were talking about on that other podcast, G'day Patriots, yesterday.
Indeed it does. Queen of the Sun, beautiful. The short film Colony Collapse Disorder. I watched it. It was 15 minutes and it didn't have any. It was very German and had no vocals. But it was just about someone wandering around being sad in a post-apocalyptic landscape, and it cut to
So
occasional.
European.
It cut to occasional pictures of protests about you're killing the bees. There are no bees left, and then all of a sudden everyone's sad and it's post-apocalyptic.
So European. Like that is was it black and white as well?
No, it was great. It was a little bit of color. Like it was
Just enough
Yeah.
to remind you what you used to have. Yeah, that's a good idea.
exactly. You wash the color out, not to 0, but to 2%.
Are you going to mention filmmaker Jerry Seinfeld and his contribution?
No, I'm not. But his movie
The
wasn't.
Bee movie came out
Yeah.
in this period, and I'm pretty sure the Bee movie wouldn't have been made if it wasn't for all the global attention to bees. Having said that, I'm not so sure. I've never watched it from beginning to end.
Are you going to say
be
it
honest.
should have been?
So I'm not so sure it really gets into Colony Collapse, but I do think that there's a link between Colony Collapse and Jerry Seinfeld's famous Bee movie.
You think it caused it?
Yes. I don't know which direction. One caused the other, and I can't.
I'm hearing
leave
the
it
movie
to
called
figure-
The Deaths. They probably suicided. They were so ashamed of how they were represented in film. You heard that from an expert.
And
Not me,
look,
not me.
one of the things I mentioned before that it's a largely female society, right? But that I believe was not accurately represented in the B movie. They went for the Hollywood tradition of male-dominated casting.
Oh my God.
No, I saw the first 10 minutes, and there was a woman on a reception desk. Done. I know.
Yeah.
So, Will, any thoughts on that?
And indeed, I have thoughts. I have thoughts on that. Well, other companies did dive in though. I didn't see Jerry Seinfeld's B movie, but Cheerios and Patagonia both rolled out Save the Bee campaigns. I can't.
Not together.
I don't think so. I don't think it was buy a hiking jacket, get some Cheerios, and save the bees.
These pockets can hold cereal, and they won't leak through into your legs. It'll be
Are
fine.
you familiar with Burt's Bees line of products from the US? They make
they're like
chapstick,
lip balm. Yeah.
Lip balm. Yeah. They're in on it. And one of the ice cream companies, I can't remember, but yeah, there's a long list of companies.
Ben and Jerry's.
Ben and Jerry's might have gotten into it. Yeah. Yep.
It's always them.
So
they're the people who really control the economy.
Yeah, I don't have all of their campaigns anymore. But Patagonia was circulating a petition calling on the feds to protect honeybee populations, imposing stricter regulations on pesticide use. I assume there was a whole lot more going on at the same time. And if we could find that ice cream, that'd be great. The Obama administration did then dive in and created a task force to develop a national strategy to promote honeybees and other pollinators, putting in $82 million in federal funding to do it and enhance.
40 million of that was spent on the uniforms.
Of course. Space Force uniforms, but for
just how it works.
Should have been B Force. So what was causing this? And at this point, I've got a list of things, and I'll bet that Saul heard some other things. Because first of all, as I said before, no one knew what was causing it. It's a little bit Mary Celeste. And so as you can imagine, Rod, having looked at places where there is an absence of knowledge, what fills up the void?
Beanon.
Beanon?
It's the precursor to QAnon. That's what I'm thinking is going on.
Look, yes, there were a lot of wacky theories. Like, okay, so you can...
There's a flat Earth, and they all fell off the edge.
I didn't find that one.
Surely.
Wow.
These guys aren't even true.
Oh, well, one, look, I'm hoping you found the mobile phone. So,
yes.
So, in the same way that 5G is one of the drivers of the COVID crisis, certainly it wasn't 5G back then. It was maybe 3G or something. But yeah, phone towers were a big one.
Yeah. So well, there's some that are plausible. I've got a list here, and they're kind of blending the plausible and the.
You mean some others that are plausible as well as those?
Indeed. Okay. Some others that were plausible.
Let's be.
And
actually, although I'm not. I don't want to suggest the phone towers were to blame. There was at least.
Suggest away, Saul.
There was at least a link there, and I think the idea was that bees do rely on very sophisticated vision to find their food. And they've also got very sophisticated little brains.
So if they're staring at screens all day, they can't do it properly.
And the idea was that the electromagnetic radiation would interfere with their navigation, their ability to navigate. Now the science shows that it would only interfere within 10 centimeters of the tower or something like that. So I think that's why it falls over. But there's actually a tiny little germ.
All I'm hearing is it's true. All I'm hearing is it does affect them.
Confirmed now.
Therefore evil.
Professor Saul says that, yes, it was mobile. Look, I think, as we know from many other topics that we've covered in this show, you need a hint of truth for any conspiracy theory. Well, not even conspiracy theory, any alternative approach to a scientific topic. A hint of truth.
Stupid idea is what you're trying to say.
Will help a lot.
I support the existence of the hint, but no more.
Yeah, okay. All right, what else have we got? Genetically modified crops, of course. Great hobby horse there. Pesticides, pollution, mass breeding, global warming, which is, I believe, it's just a fair way to go between bees and global warming. Cell phones, high voltage electric transmission lines, habitat loss, parasites such as mites, viruses, bacteria, and fungi. Other researchers said that colony collapse disorder is mainly a problem of feeding the bees a monoculture diet. They needed a more varied diet. They needed to mix things up.
They died of boredom, did they?
Yeah, they did. It was
right.
They're one of those kids
Not porridge again. Fuck that. I want some ice cream.
Mix it up. Yes.
I get it. I would die too.
Other people said that it was stress and overwork. So Michael Pollan, food writer in
Michael Pollan?
Michael Pollan. Yes, he should write about bees, shouldn't he?
Come on.
Pollen or
No, sadly, Pollan. A food writer, but very interested in agricultural practices and things like that. Said the lifestyle of the modern honeybee leaves the insects so stressed out and their immune systems so compromised that much like livestock on factory farms, they've become vulnerable to whatever new infectious agent happens to come along. So over the years, scientists have narrowed the causes down a bit. And at this point, I'm going to say that what I'm seeing out here is it's a bunch of these different things. It's a multi-causal agent. Multi-causal syndrome. The Varroa might be one of the key things. Saul, what seems to be the known state of what colony collapse disorder is at the moment?
Oh, well, you're heading in the right direction with the multi-causal idea, the syndrome idea, which in a way is the boring explanation, right? There's not one single stability kind of cause. And Varroa mite that you mentioned just there is certainly part of it. And, perhaps one of the neatest bit of evidence that Varroa mite's part of the picture is there's really only one part of the world that's got lots of honeybees and doesn't have Varroa mite. And if you've done your reading, I think you know what that part of the world is, Will.
It's Venezuela. Everything's better there.
It's Australia, right? That's so Australia is the one place, the one place in the world that doesn't really have Varroa. And really, Australian beekeepers will generally say, we don't have colony collapse disorder the way that it's described elsewhere. Yes. You
is that because the elsewhere tests more and we don't, and that's why we're seeing?
No. Because these beekeepers are professional. It's in their, they're running businesses, right? So they know what's happening with their bees, and they will say that, they might have periods where they lose colonies, and that's not good. But really, we've got nothing like what you described there. So I think I'd say that there's universal agreement that Varroa is part of it. And so Varroa is this blood-sucking mite that attacks honeybees, and it's interesting. If you think, why can this one little particular mite be such a big deal? Like normally animals have got lots of diseases, right? Why is this particular mite such a problem? Then the answer is partly to do with the fact that these are highly social animals, right? So in the same way that right now with COVID, we are vulnerable when we're living in crowded environments. Think about that in the context of a colony where you might have 50,000 individual bees all packed into like something that's
not social distancing.
Yeah, you cannot. Yeah. Bees do not social distance, and so basically a whole hive can be taken out by this parasite that takes over a colony, and it's not just the Varroa itself. It comes with this whole complex of viruses.
Yep.
But anyway, but to cut a long story short, the idea is that Varroa is certainly part of the mix, but it's probably Varroa in intersection with a number of those other things you mentioned. So vulnerabilities to do with insecticide exposure, vulnerabilities to do with the diet being reduced to a smaller number of crops and so on.
And cell phones.
Why are there no simple solutions, or at least simple problems to begin with?
Well, look, let's go with solutions, because here's where I'm actually interested in. Because
you've already got it. Social distancing, wash your, what do they call them? Feet? Feelers? What do you call a bee's 6 bits? Are they feet?
Legs.
Legs? Do they have feet at the end?
You're just looking for a more sciencey name, aren't you?
Okay, tarsi are the little bits at the end.
Okay, wash your tarsi, 20 seconds when you come back from collecting the pollens.
So that's the key thing, is that it took people quite a while to work out what was causing colony collapse. But in the meantime, well, the whole story was a little bit bullshit, because in the last few years, colonies, particularly in the US, but in Europe as well, have continued to collapse at similar sorts of rates. It's still happening. So we got this from the Bee Informed Partnership. I know. From the
I see what they did there.
Puns, I told you.
That's great.
It keeps happening.
So this is from the University of Maryland. They put this out last year, and they said that commercial beekeeping across the United States lost 40.7% of honeybee colonies between April 2018 and 2019. According to the latest annual, that loss is a slight increase over the annual average of 38.7 and roughly double the normal rates prior to the appearance of colony collapse disorder. So it's still happening. It's still happening that colonies are disappearing throughout the US. They're collapsing throughout the US.
And yet there's still food and there's still honey.
That's the thing. You know, so this is Jeffrey.
So like Corona, we just need to learn to live with it.
Maybe. Anyway. So
hive immunity.
This is Jeffrey Williams. He's one of the researchers on this Bee Informed partnership. Just looking at the overall picture and the 10-year trends, it's disconcerting that we're still seeing elevated losses after a decade of survey and quite intense work to try to understand and reduce colony losses. We don't seem to be making particularly great progress to reduce the overall losses, but that's not the whole picture. Because so someone else working in entomology, this is at Oregon State University, Michael Burgett, says that the media have overstressed the mortality aspects and largely ignored the fact that beekeeping industry is largely able to rebound. There is no way that the honeybee is endangered. And here, what I'm going to do is split apart the industrial honeybee and the rest of the pollinators.
Before you do that, I mean, they're talking about loss of life, but have they considered, quality of life?
Well, indeed.
I mean, we go straight to mortality here.
There must be a daily life adjusted.
Yeah.
So I actually think some of the responses to what's happening with bees do get into almost like welfare, animal welfare thinking, that we've made lives miserable for bees.
Yeah.
Rather than the different issue, which is, are they really endangered, which is the language of the rest of this kind of apocalypse scenario.
Absolutely. And it's so fascinating to me the way that this language has blended throughout. The idea this is endangered, and this is a graph that's really interesting to me. So this is total U.S. honeybee colonies, and we'll just zoom in here, and you can see that line in the middle is when colony collapse disorder started, and this is the total number of colonies, and basically the line is flat. Now, if we'd have been losing 40% year on year of colonies, you'd be expecting a line heading straight to the ground.
So actually, can I jump in at this point and say that I was involved in a study that tried to aggregate honeybee colony numbers from globally using sort of a UN database, the Food and Agriculture Organization database. And in that study, they showed that there certainly are places in the world where the number of honeybee colonies or hives have collapsed, right? So you could, if you pick the right country, you could get the collapse scenario that you want. And people sometimes do pick those graphs that fit the story.
They're almost cherry picking, maybe. Okay,
you could call it cherry picking.
No more cherries with this going on.
Well, cherries do need pollination. Oh, that's true. I'm impressed, Will, that you found the graph of the not much change in the US. You can also find graphs of massive increase in numbers. So a case of that is China. China has had constantly increasing honeybees, and that really, in a way, underlines the whole point here, which is that the bee population, although the beekeepers have to work with all the stresses of what's happening in agriculture and what's happening in the environment, ultimately, though, it's a commercial proposition.
Yes.
And the reason why there's more bees in China now than ever before is not that the Chinese environment is more bee friendly now than ever before. It's simply that there's been a growing commercial incentive to become a beekeeper. And
are there too many? Do they need to import the mite now to kind of pull them back again, cane toad style?
But I guess the point is, the thing that I think a lot of people struggle with is realizing that bees are livestock.
Yeah.
Bees are livestock just like cattle or sheep. Yeah. And so the number of cattle or sheep we have is determined much more by what's the market for, selling our beef or our wool or whatever, is much more driven by that than it is driven by, I don't know, climate change or grass growth or one of these sort of environmental drivers. It's driven economically. So
this is awesome, Saul, because that's exactly what is going on. Beekeeping, when we talk about the colonies, the hives that were collapsing here, it's an industry. And I just want to drill into this a little bit and explore how this industry story has blended with something that is meant other people read as an environmental story.
So I think the point there is that you can have increasing numbers of bees in spite of these problems. That doesn't mean the problems aren't real.
Oh, sure.
And so what it actually means is it might be harder to be a beekeeper now than it used to be. And there's no doubt that Australian beekeepers have the privilege of being beekeepers without this terrible and annoying disease called the Varroa mite and the complex of viruses that come with it. So that doesn't mean so Varroa is still a real problem. We're still better off without Varroa if you want to be a beekeeper. However, you can overcome it. And countries that have Varroa.
So have you done it? Like, is it a good thing to be? Like, would you want to be a beekeeper? Because I feel like it could be a bit shit.
Well, so that's a really interesting question. Firstly, unlike a lot of bee experts out there, I'm reluctant to call myself a bee expert, and I've never been a beekeeper. So,
Charlatan.
Let me just give you that.
No, we're stopping the recording immediately.
However, if you look at who are beekeepers in Australia, it's largely old blokes. And it's which is a bit like the profile for agriculture in general,
and right? Government.
Yes, and many other things perhaps.
Universities. I could keep going.
Yeah. Now, of course, there's this kind of a bit of a trend for urban beekeeping that's brought in some different beekeepers, and that has changed it up a little bit. But still, if you look at the industry profile, it's mostly old blokes. And frankly, I wouldn't want to be a commercial beekeeper. I'd be interested in being a hobbyist, but because to be a beekeeper, you have to do lots of work at night. So if you want to move your hives, you have to do it at night because that's when the bees are all in the hive, and you have to move your hives. The commercial beekeepers in Australia move their hives over an area of hundreds of kilometres. You don't. What? It's not like being a farmer where you own not just the animals, but you own the food that they eat, or at least the land that grows the food. Beekeepers own the animals, but they don't own the land.
Hundreds of kilometers.
And the US is the same. More. The US. I mean, I'll tell you a story in a sec, but they're moving them across the whole continent, really.
That's right. So beekeeping is fascinating in the way that the beekeepers they manage, and for those who can't see this podcast, I'm using those air quotes, manage.
They can hear that.
Their resource base, and their resource base is flowering plants, but they're not managing it on their own land. They're accessing flowering plants in this broad community of private.
So it's a freeloading industry. That's what I'm hearing.
No, it's not. It's not. Now, Saul's going to tell this detail in a second. I want to dive in with the story of how the beekeeping industry came to be so migratory. So. This is the US story. Now, I don't know how it parallels with the rest of the world. I assume, like many innovations, it probably did come from the US, and others might have taken it up. So Nephi Ephraim Miller, I don't know how you get the name Nephi Ephraim, was born in 1873 in Providence, Utah. He was going to inherit his father's farm and become a farmer, but as a boy, he gradually developed a strong interest in bees. And so I love this next bit. He traded a few bags of oats for 7 bee colonies when they became available.
I thought you were going to say 7 bees. That would have been this is a true from the backstory. Like,
what were their names?
They should all have names, shouldn't they? 7 bees and maybe a little bit of royal jelly to make a queen or something like that. But no, he got 7 bee colonies.
For his bags of oats, which all boys would have had hanging around at the time.
Well, that was the currency of the time.
We can go Abe Simpson now.
As the colonies grew and blossomed into a burgeoning business, Miller quit his job on a wheat threshing crew and devoted all his time to beekeeping. So obviously his passion was not in wheat threshing anymore; it was in beekeeping. Now his colonies grew, and he was doing
boring after a while.
He was doing, of course, he was doing really well. But what was growing were a number of the byproducts that came out of his beekeeping. The chief one being beeswax. And he's starting to think, there's more and more of the beeswax who's getting the honey, but heaps and heaps of beeswax. But at this time, a lot of industries were learning that byproducts could actually have other values. Instead of being waste, you could get more value out of the beeswax. So he traveled to California where he met another beekeeper who showed him how to render the beeswax into smooth cakes. But the thing that shocked him while he was in California is that he arrived, I think this must have been autumn or something like that, or, it's approaching winter. And all of his bees, as you said before, Saul, all of his bees back in Utah had cuddled in for winter. It was too cold and they weren't doing anything anymore. But all the bees in California were still out there doing stuff. They're still
it's
out
a party
collecting.
state, though. It's just what it's like.
Oh, yeah.
California, woo.
Still collecting pollen. And so he was like, what if I could move my bees to California when it gets colder? So it took a long time to convince people to put their bees on a train.
Which they called the Beeline.
Indeed. Eventually, he did convince the Union Transport Railroad to carry them to California in 1907. And then other beekeepers followed suit. And very quickly, the idea of moving your bees around the country was born. Firstly, it seems to have been so that they could get more honey during the time. They could spend more of the year productive. But secondly, they're starting to realize, hang on, you can take them to the blooms. You can go to the places where they're needed, and you can cooperate with farmers to help farmers on their crops. So they would go to California in early spring to pollinate almonds. And after that, some of them would go up to Oregon and Washington for apples and pears and cherries.
So do you know what the ultimate version of this was?
Like the longest journey or the longest migration?
Yeah, the longest journey. Well, the point that this kind of model got to, which was some years ago, Australia was sending 747s loaded with bees to California. Right?
Yeah, we were.
Which always makes me think about that movie Snakes on a Plane, which I've never seen, but it's a great title. So, there's a movie in Bees on a Plane. But anyway, so the idea there was the same thinking, but not just trucking around hundreds of kilometers, but thousands.
Well, I do love that because, that would make an awesome disaster movie because this was a little story. This happened this is a Mack truck that crashed. And it doesn't look like the worst truck crash in the world. It doesn't look like, I don't think
nothing's on fire. I see no blood, whatever.
So this was in 2014, obviously. Not obviously, but much later than 1907. They had 9 million bees on there and it crashed. And supposedly the crew trying to fix this are just like, there are bees buzzing everywhere and they're really, really agitated.
So that is just the reality. The aeroplane thing's a bit exceptional. I'll go to that in a minute. But moving your bees long distances on a truck is just an essential part of the business in Australia for the reasons you've explained. It just is, you can keep your bees collecting for longer. And it's not just about avoiding winter. It's actually in Australia, Australia is defined by Australian flowering is very patchy, because our rainfall's patchy and even our summers are pretty unpredictable and so on. So that there might be a location near you that's great one year, but frankly a bit shit the next year. And beekeepers actually have to go out, they count the buds, and they make a prediction. Is this going to be a good spot for my bees this year or not? And if not, then where else am I going to go? And they have to do this really complicated mental calculation of where in the distance that my truck will drive, will I take my bees to make sure they've got good food? But the other thing I wanted to throw in there is you talked about byproducts of pollination. And in fact, in many ways, the ultimate byproduct of bees.
Yes.
The ultimate byproduct of bees is the pollination, right? So normally beekeepers get to sell their honey and they get to sell their wax and they get to sell propolis and royal jelly and these various other things they do. And ask me
what was that other one? Oh, that's what I was going to say. What is propolis? I've never.
Don't ask me because I'm not certain. It's some weird resin
It's their feet, isn't it? It's their feet. When they're dead, you can take their feet and use them for something.
But the ultimate byproduct is the fact that they're pollinating crops, right? And when they pollinate a crop, that does nothing for the beekeeper, right? The beekeeper benefits when a bee makes honey or makes wax or makes propolis or whatever. But the beekeeper gets no benefit when a bee pollinates a crop. Only the grower benefits. So the only way there's a benefit to the beekeeper is if the grower pays the beekeeper to bring the bees in. So that is what then led to 747 loads of bees going to California from Australia, is they couldn't get enough hives of enough quality locally at a good enough price. And some business-minded Australian beekeepers said, you know what, we can get you a
My God.
747 load. Now, I should say those bees never came back, right? It was a
I
one-way.
was going to say, because what happens then? They might get the Varonas or whatever it was, and then they're going to be in a hotel for 4
Well, this is why they stopped. This is why they stopped, right? So
Yeah.
initially, Australia was a safe source because Australia did not have Varroa and still does not have Varroa. But they got some disease problems, which they feared were from the Australian bees. I'm reliably told by Australian beekeepers and other people that it was never our fault. And I think it might have even been proven that it was not the fault of Australian bees. But still, it was the biosecurity that got in the way of continuing that model.
Huh.
One of the really interesting problems is that if you look at why people value bees, and you talked about the supermarket shelf and how much we attribute to bees, the biggest value in terms of dollars is all on the crop pollination side. But the beekeepers, for them, they're driven by honey because they get paid for some pollination, but a lot of the pollination they don't get paid for. So it's this really difficult business.
Does that differ between Australia and America? Are the arrangements more formalized in America compared with Australia in this sense, or
it differs from place to place and crop to crop and year to year because it's a supply demand kind of problem, right? And it's a really messy relationship because when you're a provider of pollination services, like a beekeeper that brings a truckload of bees, you're doing this thing that's very important for the crop, but it's kind of hard to know if it's happening as it should.
How do you cost it?
Yeah, how do you guarantee that all your bees are going to stay on those trees and not just fly over those trees?
If you can't cost it, then you have to do it pro bono.
Ah,
yeah,
nice.
Very nice. So the pollination payments are increasingly important, but they're really, really tricky. And there's not necessarily a huge amount of trust between the beekeeper and the grower. Like another way of thinking about it is if you're a grower and you see a white box placed in your field to pollinate your crops, are you brave enough to open the lid and look inside?
I assume it's anthrax.
Are you saying there could be fake bees? Like they just put a colony there and they're like, yeah, man, they're just all out today. Don't worry about it. Or if they're not there, you caused a colony collapse.
There are certainly growers, probably not so much that there's literally nothing in the box, but what if it's a really lame box? What if it's a sick box?
Oh, wow.
Okay?
Oh.
So there's
I'm hearing
really
so many
complex
business
trust.
opportunities right now where we can make money at last.
No, I don't want to. I love this, Saul, because one of the little stories, I wasn't actually sure I was going to get to this, is that so it's like the 50s. An economist tried to do some of the economics of honeybee pollination, and he said, "Oh, this is an unpaid factor in apple farming, since orchard owners and beekeepers didn't coordinate their production decisions. Both produce what economists call positive externalities." And he said what we've got to do is we've got to put some subsidies and taxes to make sure it happens. But then 20 years later, another economist, Stephen Chung, actually looked up in the phone book. All he did is picked up the yellow pages and looked up beekeepers and pollination services and talked to them. And he said, look, this was in the bit in America where he was working. There's all of these relationships that do exist. People are doing it all the time. So it was a nice bit of real life farmers solving this problem, but economists not actually knowing what's going on.
Yeah, but I guess I would just say so there definitely is a market, and it's a market that people get paid in, but it's a very imperfect market, and it's imperfect because of that very uneven understanding that each player might have. So growers don't necessarily know that much about bees, and don't know how to judge if they're getting what they paid for. Beekeepers don't necessarily know that much about the crops that they might be pollinating, and frankly, they don't necessarily care that their bees pollinate. I'm not saying that they're deliberately avoiding it, but it's not their incentive really is just to get the payment.
Does it downgrade the quality of the honey? Like if they're pollinating some cherries or something like that, compared with...
So often the crops that they might get paid to pollinate are not the best source for making honey.
Yeah, okay.
If the crop is also good for making honey, then the farmer of the crop can quite comfortably say, well, I don't need to pay you that much because you're getting good honey out of this, right? So the almond industry is the one that really pays the most, and that's both because it's a really big and fast growing and profitable business in Australia and California, but it's also because they don't actually the bees don't make very good honey when they're on almonds. So the beekeepers are not going to go to almonds just for the honey. They're only going to go if they're paid, right? And so what happens in Australia is you have this relatively small area that's in the corner where sort of New South Wales and Victoria and South Australia come together, where all the almonds are growing. And for 2 weeks of the year, like more than half the bees in Eastern Australia are all trucked. This is these moving hundreds of kilometres thing. They're all trucked into that little corner where all the almonds are growing. They're servicing that industry those 2 weeks, and then they all truck out again. So you get this massive concentration, and there's millions of dollars in fees being paid by the almond industry to make sure those beekeepers show up.
So the almond industry know that they're capturing value for that.
Oh, absolutely. They I think my data was some years ago, they were paying $13 million a year to beekeepers to guarantee that they arrived, because it's just a quirk of the nature of almonds that if you didn't have insect pollination, you wouldn't get almonds.
Yeah, right.
Whereas a lot of the crops...
so never mess with big nuts is what I'm hearing, because they've really got some power.
For a lot of the crops, if you don't have pollination, you might not produce quite as much, but you're not going to go to zero, right? These are important, but they're not literally vital. Whereas with almonds, the way they're growing in Australia and California, if you don't have bees, you don't have almonds. So that $13 million investment is an unavoidable cost right now to almonds.
So I've got a number here, Saul, and I just want to check, does this ring true in Australia or you're understanding more recently? So this is in 1988, this is US, honey sales made 52% of beekeeper revenue, while pollinator fees made up 11%. So pollination was not very important. It was a thing, but not very important. But by now, pollination service fees are the most important, 41% of their revenue, and the other byproducts are all less than that. Honey is in the 30s or 20s, and other byproducts after that. Does that rack up in Australia?
My understanding from Australian beekeepers is we're not there yet, as in pollination is long being expected that the pollination payments will become more and more important, but we're not at the point where it's more important than honey. And there's a few different reasons for that. Part of it might be that we actually have more free pollination happening, right? So if you're a producer of a crop, why pay for honeybees to show up if you're actually getting it done for free by wild bees?
So the incentive here for beekeepers is to exterminate the wild bees.
Yes.
Kill
natives, it's tradition.
I didn't say that. So there's that. And I forgot, I was going to make another really important and vital point, and I forgot what it was. So I'll just...
That's all right.
There.
We'll come to because
we're recording on Friday afternoon and we're drinking. It's not your fault.
So this is one of the arguments about colony collapse disorder, is that yes, it's a thing. And yes, there are Varroa mites and a few other things that are multi-causally making colonies collapse and go all Mary Celeste on people, but it had barely any impact at all. So pollination fees is one of the ways people have tracked this. And so they looked at this and they said, okay, for almonds, as Saul said, are one of the crops that is most dependent on bees. And they said all of colony collapse disorder may have increased the retail price of a $7 can of smokehouse almonds by 8.4 cents, 1.2%. So and that
but
was
to be fair, normally they'd only cost 10 cents a can. So that
was $7. That was no, like barely had any impact at all, and consumers couldn't even see it after all of this. So basically, what the beekeepers were doing is they would just split a hive. If a colony collapsed, then they would, I assume, get rid of that wood because it's probably tainted wood, and they'd build a new hive, which probably doesn't cost enormous amounts. And they take in a living hive or buy new bees by mail order. I think it's $19 for a queen or something like that.
Well, the other thing you do, right? So we talked about one of the problems for bees is the declining resource base, the food that they need, to grow their hives. But you can always buy sugar and feed sugar to your bees. And you can, in fact, buy pollen cakes, mostly made in China, and give them pollen. So whereas the traditional beekeeping is about taking your hive out into a place that provides pollen and nectar, a more industrialized version of beekeeping that can still make $1 here, if we just view beekeeping as a business, is I'm going to give them sugar to substitute for the nectar they would normally collect, and I'm going to give them pollen that's been extracted from some
Do they have to put the sugar like in little flowers or something like that to make it attractive?
No, I think they just put it in a dish next to the hive. It's much bees. This is one of my other little favorite themes. We always talk about bees being very busy and hardworking. Bullshit. Bees, like all other animals, including humans, will, if given a choice, go the easy way. Right? So if you put a dish of sugar water next to the hive, they will not fly the extra distance to go and sip from a flower. They will drink the sugar water and go back to the hive. So what's happened then is you can even if the environment has gone to shit for bees, you can, as you often can in agriculture, you can just externalize that problem, right? So yes, I've got to pay for sugar, and yes, I've got to pay for pollen, which I didn't used to have to do, but I can still grow my population and I can still get more bees. However, that's also seen as perhaps one of the reasons why many of the populations are weak, is because you don't have as healthy bees. They're not the best bees.
Too much sugar.
But they're still bees.
That's awesome.
Yeah, sugar feeding is something that lots of people all around the world do. Australian beekeepers will often boast, and I think it's true, that they very rarely do it because we're not.
We'll boast about anything though, won't we?
That's
we really
true.
will. We really will. What are you the best at? I don't know. Some shit I've never heard of before.
Not feeding our bees sugar.
Yeah, we haven't got fat bees.
And we can always claim things that actually happen in New Zealand. That's the other, Pavlova and the Finn brothers.
It's a tradition. Also,
Yeah,
I'm happy not to claim the Finn brothers. Who gives a shit about Crowded House? Terrible.
I'm almost losing my train of thought. But so sugar feeding is something we don't have to do so much in Australia, but is certainly happening overseas. And that data I gave you before about China increasing its number of bees, that's partly because they said, well, all right, we'll feed them sugar and we'll get more bees. We'll just and pollen. You can't just do the sugar, but for any. I guess this is the secret of agriculture, is agriculture depends on our environments and these natural services, but you can always crank the knob to 11 by intervening a little bit. And bees are no different then to the way we might have intensive, egg-laying chickens or intensive grazing cattle that we feed in lots or whatever.
Yeah.
All right.
Good for us.
So here's the question I want to end on. And this I'd like to Saul, you can take the fifth on this, because maybe why was there such a panic, and who was to blame? I mean, we don't have to say.
Can I say before you answer, Saul, I did hear of this panic at the time.
Yeah.
Because, I read the popular sciences magazines and stuff.
And you were still concerned to this day, but you just...
No, I gave up because it didn't come back. But at the time I was like, whoa, Jesus, here's another way we're basically bending ourselves over. And that's not cool. It'd be bad not to have heaps of food. So it's interesting. I hadn't thought about it. I'm surprised how long it's been since I thought about it until you.
Now, before you jump in, Saul, I'm just gonna frame two possible answers here, and you can run with adding a third or a fourth. And
he's an expert. He's got 12.
Yeah, sure, exactly. First one, was it environmentalists? And here's where you can take the fifth if you want. But there were plenty, it seems to me, of environmentalists who ran with this as a potential, apocalypse. So, you've got The Guardian, you'd call them environmentally aligned here, talking about this as an existential threat, or all the stories of the bee apocalypse or the Beemageddon. And take away the puns, it's fun to say them, but they were pointing to this crisis point for crops. Then you've got other environmental campaigners like Friends of the Earth saying, okay, well, this is such a worrying thing, we should get rid of all pesticides for the moment. Then I
can you imagine? What? From tomorrow, complete moratorium.
We
won.
I also spent a little bit of time going through comment threads about this issue, and the comment threads get totally wild. And people are, they're hating on Monsanto, they're hating on pesticides, and then they're saying that, Germany shows the 75% loss of insect population together with bees, worrying. These symptoms are just like cancer. And then this one ends with, I see that you are funded by Monsanto, so you are a murderer. Congratulations. So there's huge hyperbole amongst the environmental movement about this
This
thing.
is probably the only issue that they do get hyperbolic on.
So that's one possible.
In their defense.
The other one I'm raising is maybe the beekeepers themselves. So maybe they wanted to raise this for some sort of reason. So remember that Einstein quote I said at the beginning there, Rod? If the bee disappears from the surface of the earth, man would have no more than 4 years to live. Now, it's probably made up. It's not by Einstein at all, or at least no one can find the original by Einstein.
He didn't publish in a lot of apiarist journals.
No,
I was going to say, that's, if he did say it, why would we listen to Einstein for bee advice?
I know.
He's a smart guy, but really, just, yeah,
seriously,
anyway.
it's physicists dabbling outside their area. Just don't. But anyway, I did follow this up on Snopes. They investigate fake news and conspiracies and where memes came from. And they said, okay, the first time we could find this was a 1994 political protest staged by European beekeepers. And so basically, someone there had a sign saying, "As the bees go, so go the humans." Within a few, and this is John Potter from Norwich, within a few years, all the wild colonies will die out. The honeybee is threatened with a rapid decline. It's going to be a chain reaction. So
when someone said, "How do you know?" and he said, "Einstein."
So there you go. There's my two
All right, so
explanations.
I'll have a go at dealing with those two. And I'm going to preface, I'm not going to take the fifth, but I'm going to preface this all by saying, although there's I totally agree that the apocalyptic story was overblown in a really unhelpful way. I would say it's not that there's nothing happening, right? There are a whole bunch of real problems bound up here. It's just that they're not being presented really sincerely, honestly. So it's not one of these conspiracy theories where there's a total absence of anything going on. It is, there are some real issues. So I tend to think that we do have a problem, various problems in how we do agriculture, including the excessive use of pesticides. However, yes, this was very unhelpfully overblown. And I would say that, so your kind of number one was it the environmentalists? So to that, I would say I probably count myself as an environmentalist. So I'm going to be, a little bit personally hurt by that suggestion.
I do too, but
But I would say that environmentalists have, including myself at various times, have often found it really almost comforting to fall back into what we call the declensionist narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, the declensionist narrative is
That's what you do when your pants don't fit properly?
No.
I'm doing it now.
The lightest version is things were better in the good old days. The more extreme version is we are all going to hell in a handbasket or worse, right? It's a very appealing narrative. You can see there's biblical overtones. The fall from the perfection of the Garden of Eden or something. I don't know.
Also, declension as in the decline.
Decline, yeah.
Because I hear declension and I'm flashing back to my Latin classes in years 7, 8, and 9. Declining verbs, that's all I hear. And it's not the same kind of decline.
No, it's the decline it's like the fall from grace or something.
I'm okay with that because I don't want to do Latin right now.
So, and of course, why do environmentalists do this? It's a nice shorthand way of packaging. Look, almost any story, right? Almost any environmental story can be structured around
and some of it's true.
And this is back to my starting point. It's not that it's totally made up. There is elements of truth in this. My concern about this is, even though it feels like a very convenient narrative, and we know that the advertising industry often uses fear as a way of motivating people to make decisions, to buy stuff, right? And so it's that same logic. Like, if we scare the shit out of people, then maybe we'll get what we want, which is some kind of change. And sometimes, the change that they're driving for is something I would really agree with. Yeah, we do want that change. But my limited understanding of psychology tells me that, the other thing that happens is you totally inure people to even listening,
You do.
So for every person that you turn on with oh my God, the world's going to end, I need to do something, there's another person, or maybe 2 or 3 people who are like, shit, we've heard that one before. This is just yet another thing that's going to kill us. 10 years ago it was, or before global warming there was global cooling, and what about the cancer and whatever. So yeah, I think environmentalists are unhelpfully addicted to this really negative kind of narrative, even though sometimes it's probably justified, and we need to learn to talk a lot more about things in a positive way.
Well, just because it's true doesn't mean it's persuasive, and that's something people get lost in. And there's heaps of evidence and research on how fear campaigns backfire wildly at times. I mean, smoking, etc. I won't go into all of it because it'd be a lecture and a course, but there's heaps of evidence on that.
And being positive doesn't actually mean necessarily that you deny the bad things that are happening. It's more turning around and saying, okay, so where are we going with this?
Yeah, we accept this as a condition. Now, what are we going to do?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so with pollination, I would say there's all sorts of really great stories about things we can do better and about ways we can improve agriculture that include better use of pollinators and that are not off the table but they only appear off the table if you believe the slightly exaggerated bee apocalypse idea. So I think, it's kind of surprising that in this area that should be really attractive, you're talking about food and things that we love and beautiful flowers that smell nice and all this stuff, we've gone and turned that into a story about death and destruction. So yeah, number one, I do think that there's a degree of environmentalists falling back into a lazy sort of negative narrative that we should turn around. And then your number two was, is it the beekeepers? Look, I don't think it's the beekeepers on their own, because I've already said that I think that there's a degree of the kind of environmental activists who are latching onto the story. However, as with any of these kinds of debates where there's power and money at stake, if you see an argument that's running your way, you'll jump on. And I think it's probably true that, or in fact, I know it's true because I know people who've done it, that beekeepers will enthusiastically pursue these stories in the most negative tone, because it appears to emphasize the importance of supporting them and their industry. And they're an industry that it's a tough business for the reasons we talked about before. They're under all sorts of different political pressures. They're worried about the effect of pesticides and Varroa mite and whatever. So they are dealing with difficult problems. And so they might see this as a narrative that might help them achieve some better outcomes. But again, I would go back to the point that, really, isn't there a risk that people are going to call you out and say, hang on a minute, isn't that a bit bullshit? So
was there ever a point for you as, bee spurt, even though you're not allowed to call yourself that, where when this first kicked off and you became aware of it, you went, geez, we're a bit fucked? Or was there a period at all where you're thinking, ooh?
I think I, from pretty early on in the piece, knew that it was nowhere near as simple as the story that was being told. But it's taken me a long time to understand something closer to the truth, simply because it's really bloody complex.
Sure.
I could talk.
So you were never freaking out? There was never a moment where you went,
No. I wasn't. And I think the main reason I was never freaking out, which is something we haven't touched on that much, is all of this conversation is about this one bee species, right? European honeybees.
Yeah.
And we showed in some data that friends of mine and myself collected, we showed very early on, most agricultural production just doesn't use honeybees. So
this is awesome. You've made me feel better. I forgot I was freaking out about it when I first heard about it, and now it's rekindled it, and I've come back through
and calmed you down again.
I'm like,
this is why this is a wholesome
if you
show.
Want, I can tell you all the bad stuff that's happening as well.
No. Let's end on a nice note.
The bottom line is that if you ask me for a really short version of what's the real problem, I would say the real problem is that there are certain industries that are highly dependent on the provision of honeybees. Almonds is one that we've talked about, but there's a few other ones. And they've got a justifiable reason to be nervous, right? Right. If there are bee disease problems that means it's harder for them to get their bees, then those almond producers have got a problem on their hands, because although there's wild pollinators out there, you can't make them all show up in massive numbers in literally their billions for 2 weeks, right? So they're tied into a system that does need the thousands of truckloads of bees for 2 weeks to show up and
as much as I love almonds and almond milk, it's not necessarily an apocalypse though.
So exactly. So it's not nothing.
Can you imagine? Save the world. You can't have almonds anymore. All right.
It's not nothing, but it's not going to lead to people, fleeing, having to move country and starving and whatever.
It's a pretty strong jump for like the underpinning plot of our post-apocalyptic movie is no longer we have almond milk.
First they came for the almond.
And look,
growers.
I'll give you the other example I like to talk about here is coffee. So coffee always gets to people because, lots of people really value their coffee. I certainly greatly value my coffee, right? And coffee is a crop that does certainly benefit from pollination, right? If coffee got a bit more expensive, firstly, it would probably be a small increment like you described for almonds. But, if coffee got a little bit more expensive, it's not exactly going to cause mass starvation. The more real issue with coffee, I believe, is coffee production is one of the biggest employers, or I shouldn't say one of the biggest, but is a massive employer in a bunch of countries that don't have a whole lot of other options, right? So if we had a problem in the coffee industry, the coffee production side, I would be much more concerned about the millions of people whose livelihoods depend on producing coffee than I would, us three who might have to pay an extra few cents when they buy a coffee at the coffee shop.
It's very good of you, Saul. It's very good of you.
So the point is that agriculture is often, it always communicates as being about feeding us, as if it's this, which, of course, yes, we do need food, but actually agriculture is culture and industry and employment and livelihoods, and it's way more complicated than just a source of calories, right? If you reduce it to a source of calories, which is what you imply by conversations about famine, well, then basically most of this, we're producing more calories now on Earth than at any time in the past, and that doesn't look like it's flattening out very fast.
And to be fair, coffee's very low calorie. That's why I drink
it depends how many sugars you put in it. But if you think about food as, part of culture and part of employment and all that kind of stuff, then you get into a much more nuanced conversation. Yeah. And I think that's the reality of it. So if there was a problem in the world of coffee, it would be a problem we should care about, but we're probably not going to be facing, it's not going to be one of the drivers of population collapse.
That's awesome. Look, I am very heartened that I no longer need to worry about a bee apocalypse, and also that my coffee is safe. Look, I care very much, but it's been so gratifying hearing from you, Saul. That yes, there are things to worry about, but maybe not everything.
We all need to learn. We all need to learn as communicators. We're communicators, and hopefully your listeners include people that want to communicate better. How do we turn these things into something where we can actually engage in a more meaningfully enduring conversation, rather than the kind of the short advertising version of the conversation, which is the be scared.
There you go.
We have that covered. Listen to episodes of this very podcast.
Thank you so much. That is, this has been the Wholesome Show, where we have deconstructed the bee apocalypse. I've been Will Grant. He's been Rod Lamberts. And thank you so much to Saul Cunningham.
Thanks. It's been great fun.